Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. And welcome to Gender Dialogues, what top social innovators agree to disagree. It looks like everyone took Marie's invitation to connect and converse with one another. And thank you for choosing among the myriad of sessions that are available. Thank you for choosing to be with us. My name is Zeynep Meydanoğlu. I carry two hats at this virtual summit. First one is I'm Ashoka's country director for Turkey, a country that's never boring, to say the least. And my second hat is I'm Ashoka's Next Now field leader for gender. And as Next Now, we are on an exciting quest to identify emerging futures and emerging solutions in four exciting fields, including planet and climate, tech and humanity, aging, and gender. So in the gender field, we've had the opportunity to cross paths with many social innovators, young change makers, Ashoka Fellows to get their insights on where the field is going, what they are learning from their work at this moment. And we're also on a quest to identify the up and coming social innovators, the next 50 social entrepreneurs working on gender equity and gender justice. Basically the idea for this session came about as a result of us listing, mapping, examining the work of social entrepreneurs and having conversations with them, that the field could use more dialogue. Although many different actors were tackling the same problematic system, which they all roughly identified as patriarchy, the idea that the male or a group of males should hold the power and that it's okay for others to be excluded from it, let's say, to put it very simply. Although it was the very same system they were tackling, they were all in their little clusters. So kind of the women's human rights movement, the women's economic empowerment movement, the LGBTQIA movement. So there wasn't much connection between these clusters. So we thought, why not have a session where we host social innovators from different areas of the field who are tackling this systemic problem and hear what they agree on, what they disagree on, and what they at least agree to disagree on. So I have very distinguished speakers with me today. I'm sure it will be a rich, lively discussion. But before I introduce them to you, I want to introduce our technical host, who's gonna hold the space for us, Ezgi from the Ashoka Turkey team. And she has a few tips on how to engage and how to make the most of this session. Ezgi?
Hello everyone, thank you Zeynep. We are so excited to share this session with you. I will be coordinating this session, which means I will be directing your questions and comments to our panelists from our audience. So to put your comments, you can choose, you can use the tool chat on live discussion part of Swapcard. And you can also use the questions part on the right, so we can see your questions directly and you can direct your questions to a specific panelist. I hope you have a great session. Thank you, Zeynep. Back to you.
Perfect, thank you. So I'll go ahead and briefly introduce our speakers. We'll get to know them much better during the conversation. And I'll do it from east to west, so that we also give our participants from the western, more western part of the hemisphere some time to, let's say, freshen up and wake up if they still need to, because it's quite early, some of those places. So I'll start with Tanha Tanji, who is the founder of TransAnd, which is a very inspiring youth-led initiative from Bangladesh. And they've taken it upon themselves to empower the transgender community through dignified work and employment. Currently, they support over 100 transgender individuals in getting into the community life, in supporting themselves, being independent economically in Dakar. And they've gathered quite powerful insights along the way. So we'll be hearing from Tanha on what they've been learning. And then we have a little bit further west from Ghana, we have Regina Honu of Soronko Academy, who is leading one of the most powerful ICT education and empowerment initiatives. She's empowering women and girls in Ghana. I think they've reached close to 10,000 at the moment in a very holistic way. While also preparing the communities that are homes of these girls and women so they can also adapt to the change that's going to bring to the communities. So welcome, Regina. Very happy to have you here. We also have Lula Ramirez from Brazil, from Sao Paulo, who is a true serial social entrepreneur, a life dedicated to sexual diversity and youth empowerment. He's an expert in working within systems. He's worked in the Brazil public school system before, and now he's working with the Catholic Church within the system on opening up spaces for dialogue on sexual diversity, tolerance, and acceptance. And finally, all the way west in Washington, D.C., we have Dean Peacock, who is representing, who recently took on the job of Man for Feminist Peace, and who also has a lifetime dedicated to building networks that facilitate engaging boys and men in the gender equity agenda globally, helping them find what's their part to play in this fight against patriarchy. So welcome to all these amazing social innovators. And I will dive right in. And I always like to start with the personal. So as some wise people said a while ago, personal is political. So I wanted to ask you all the same question. What happened personally, or what is it personally that tied you to these political movements that you're a part of right now? I see smiles and eyebrows raised.
Go first. Yeah. So, if I talk about that, like, yeah, there's a lot of things happening around us, and there's a lot of people around us, a lot of injustices happening, a lot of issues we can see, but what actually driving us, like if we talk about us here, the change makers, we all are the change makers. So what drives us or drives us go forward, right? So if I talk about myself, transgender, the topic, that the field that I working right now to transcend, and in our country it's a lot tabooed. In our country, transgender people are locally called as hijra, and they are abandoned from their family in a very early age. They are deprived of every human rights, and they are living in slums, and and they are involved in sex working or baking. So when I used to see them begging in transportations or in parks when I was a child, I often think, why? I mean, why they are doing it? Why the hijra child are begging? Why aren't they going to school like me? So I think these are the questions that actually made me start Transcend, and from why to start to go forward. I think the storytelling, when I start to know their stories, when I go to their hubs, talk to them, and they kept telling me their life story, their life struggles, the true stories, that actually made me so empathetic that oh my God, so that this turmoil or this miserable way they are living their life. So that's how I think I wake up every day thinking, oh my God, so there's another place in my country, same age, in my age, some people are actually working in a slum and are not living in their family and are deprived of every human rights. So and then whenever I'm talking to them, I'm promising them that I will I promise them I will ensure a better society, a better country for them. So I think this promises this emotional storytelling times, the emotional interaction, even when right now pandemic is going on and we are stuck at home. I keep talking to them through over phone weekly, and even now when I'm talking to them, their stories and these promises actually make me go forward and give me
Thank
the
you,
fuel
Tana.
to work.
Perfect.
Okay, I'm gonna go next. Um, just like well, just like Tanha, you know, you go through certain experiences. So personally, myself, I was very curious, very interested in science and technology, but I was constantly being told it's not for girls, it's for boys. Growing up in my career, I was the only female in the IT department. I worked in 2 international banks, and I went through sexism, stereotyping, discrimination, you name it. But also, I saw the opportunities within the technology space in order to bring the female perspective in the technology that's being created, in order to be part of creating solutions for the future, in order to be able to drive change. And so for me, this was really a great avenue for more women and girls. And I didn't want them to be left behind or to be disempowered with this new tool called technology, where they didn't know how to, you know, effectively use and create with it. And so this is really how it started from my own experiences, being sort of having to bring my seats to the table, going into these male dominated spaces and having to prove myself, but then also seeing the opportunity in the space and seeing how women could thrive, and could do very well, and also appreciating that innovation is important if it's diverse. We can't just have males or females. It's important that we come together. So really, that is how that's the motivation behind me starting the academy and the work that I do.
Thank you, Regina. Lula or Dean, who wants to go next?
I can go. Just to keep the global logic, okay, have the earth spinning. Well, I have the feeling that even when we are fighting to save the whales, for example, we are doing something about ourselves. Okay, so anything that you do that you fight for involves your inner self. Well, in my case, I'm a gay man, and as a gay teenager, I had to struggle with a lot of feelings of discrimination, rejection, and everything. So, in a certain way, if you want to survive with dignity in the world today, you have to fight for to be heard, to be yourself. Okay, and well, that let's say I'm 60 years old now, so I was growing up in the 60s and in the 70s. So with a lot of things happening in the field of gender and sexuality, we had the women's movement and the gay rights movements, and at a certain moment, I realized that I had to get involved with that. Okay, not just for myself, but for everybody else. Okay, because I think that when you make like Jen, when he fights for boys and men to advocate for women, this is not good only for women. This is good for everybody. When when we fight for LGBT rights, it's good for everyone, either gay or straight. So, and the challenge was First of all, I was in a group that was a self-help group. So I had the feeling that I had resolved my personal issues, and I could help other people to resolve their issues. Okay. And after some time, as I was a teacher of philosophy, I had the feeling that we should help students at schools. But then you have a lot of students, and it should be too dangerous to talk to students directly, because we would be accused of uh, how can I say, of, making them gay, okay, turning them gay, which is absurd. So we decided to work with teachers, because teachers could talk to students and, help them, both gay and straight students, okay, because everybody, when you were a teenager, everybody's fighting with your own feelings, with your own sexuality. So that's what moved me to do something
Thank
about it.
you, Lula. And I read in your bio, so it really follows your life story very closely. And I read in your biography that at some point you considered becoming a priest. And
Yeah,
it's no coincidence that now, after public schools, after education system, now you're working in the field of religion and the church. So we will ask you about that
okay,
more towards the end of our conversation.
okay, I'll
Dean,
talk about it later, okay.
you are the last one. I hope we bought you some time to wake up and join us. What personally drives you?
Yeah, good morning. And fortunately, I have some coffee, so gradually waking up here in DC. But yeah, thanks so much. And, there's a particular moment that comes to mind. My partner back in 1991 in Oakland, California, was volunteering at a battered women's shelter. We were involved in all sorts of political activity, including opposing US imperialism in Latin America, the Middle East. And she came home from a training at the battered women's shelter, and she said with great excitement that she had heard from a man who was working in an organization called Men Overcoming Violence. And he had spoken about the vital importance of engaging men to address men's violence. And it was this moment that a light bulb went off. I was, as I say, involved in other kind of political activities, but it was very clear to me in that moment, having grown up in apartheid South Africa, in a very patriarchal world, that I, as a man, had a role to play in challenging men's violence. And so that was kind of what started me on the journey, was this political epiphany, if you like, that there was something really important that I, as a man, should do to address men's violence and to address men's resistance to gender equality. But what's kept me in this work now for nearly 30 years, it's hard to believe, but it's true, is the deep hunger that I experience from people around me for a world in which there's more flexibility in terms of gender roles. So it's not just a quest for equality, but a quest for gender justice and far greater flexibility in terms of how we live our gendered lives. So if I think about my 14-year-old daughter, as she moves into the world, her frustration with kind of rigid, inflexible gender roles, with heteronormativity, is very, very clear. When I work with men, whether that's in South Africa or here in the US or in Latin America, where I've also worked, and it doesn't matter really which men, if it's traditional leaders, religious leaders, ordinary men in local communities, there's a hunger amongst men for a different set of possibilities. And as Lula was saying, I think men too around the world, whether they recognize it or not, experience our existing gender order as quite claustrophobic, with predictable consequences for women in terms of violence, patriarchal oppression, and for men in terms of poor health, disconnected lives. So, I've worked with perpetrators of violence. I've worked at the community level with men involved in political movements. And that hunger for change is quite palpable. So that's what's kept me in the work for all these years. Of course, also inspired by LGBTQI movements, women's rights movements. I remember sitting in Nicaragua in '93 as a group of women kind of outdoors in a market were preparing for participation in the Beijing platform and the Beijing conference, right? With a tremendous sense of excitement. And so we have, I think, seen remarkable progress in many ways over the last nearly 3 decades, and that has certainly kept me going in this journey. So let me stop there.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing. Kind of all of you shared what got you started, but also what kept you going, which is, I think, equally important. I want to fast forward to today, and I'm wondering what you're doing right now and what excites you the most. So I hope it's not like asking you to pick your favorite child, but kind of, is there something that stands out? And we don't have to follow the rotation of the earth, so please feel free to take the floor.
I think what particularly makes me excited is solving a problem. Like, I'm still young and I'm adventurous. I love problem solving, and since childhood I'm doing it everywhere. And my mom even sometimes said that, why are you always there when some issue or something is messed up? I'm always there. So it starts from classroom to working in this society. So I think that's it. What excites me every day is making a difference.
For me, it's really seeing this change, especially happening in Ghana, where you see a lot more women wanting to go into technology now. So before, it took us quite a lot to hit certain numbers, but now when we put out a program, they are like, we have to turn people away because there's so many women. And also seeing this increase in the voice and the participation of women in different conversations. So this is what excites me. And I think the last piece is how we're seeing women using technology, not only in the creation point, but using it to form groups where there are like lots of Facebook groups, a lot of social media groups, using WhatsApp in an innovative way where they are moving from the traditional e-commerce like we know it online, but using it also mobile. So I really am excited to see how we have made progress and how we're seeing more women in terms of their voices and their participation when it comes to especially technology.
Well, my turn. Well, I think, to be very honest, that to be excited about anything today in this world, it's something very hard. I don't know what's going on in your areas, in your countries, but in Brazil, due to the pandemics, okay, a lot of people I know are getting depressed, okay? And so, and if you talk about LGBT people who tend to be more lonely, and if they have to stay at home, and so I think what excites me is that you can help people. I was thinking that my utmost motivation is, as well, Zainab told you, that I'm a Catholic, and there's a verse in the Bible who says that blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. Okay. When I think about justice, I think that, anything or everything that you see that is wrong, that is badly affecting someone, you have to stand up and fight against it. And it can be discrimination, it can be prejudice, it can be inequality, because poor people are not having their rights respected. And so I think that this is my fuel, okay? When I wake up every morning and I say, well, there's a lot of fights, there's a lot to be done today, tomorrow, and in the years coming. And well, I think that's it. Okay, it's I have always the feeling that there are things that I will not see in my lifetime, but I'm paving the way to the younger, at least.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think Lula raises a really important point that we exist in a moment of extreme contestation. We have, strongman patriarchal leaders in far too many countries, certainly in Brazil, where Bolsonaro's support seems to grow remarkably, and in many other countries. Fortunately, here in the US, we hope to see the patriarch in the White House leave in the next few weeks. And so there is momentum, there is, the possibility of change. Pope Francis also, I think, an example of a leader who's pushing back against really oppressive traditions. And alongside of that, there's been remarkable progress and momentum amongst organizations that are working with men for gender equality. A group of us started what's called the Men Engage Alliance in 2006. And it is now active in 70 countries around the world, about 50 formally constituted Men Engage networks in 50 countries around the world, and has probably close to 1,000 member organizations. The third global Men Engage Symposium is happening at the moment, 2,000 people participating in that online. That was unimaginable when I joined Men Overcoming Violence as a volunteer nearly 30 years ago. It was just absolutely unimaginable. And so that's part of what, sort of inspires me when I wake up in the morning. The other thing that's happening, and it's happening particularly in the US, but it's also happening in some of the countries represented here, in Bangladesh, for instance, is this quite problematic shift towards increasingly punitive sanctions for people who have perpetrated violence. And the research shows us that locking people up for longer and longer, executing people, castrating people does nothing to reduce the levels of men's violence against women. And it causes survivors of violence significant harm. So here in the US, and I think in other places around the world, there is a growing conversation questioning the logic of relying on the criminal legal system to address gender violence. And I think there's a very important shift towards thinking about prevention and to thinking about some of the upstream drivers of violence and how we address those. So that conversation about prevention, how do we stop the violence before it happens, is a critical conversation that I'm really excited to participate in, and that I wake up on some mornings excited about participating in.
Thank you, Dean. It's very interesting, actually. It's quite mind-boggling for me, kind of, coming from a country where perpetrators of violence hardly ever get penalized, but then hearing you articulate this, I cannot disagree either. So it's one of those issues in this session that are going to come up, I think. So actually, I want to break the order, or at least reverse it. So I'll go back to Dean with the next question and ask you about how you see your field. Kind of, what does it need to learn in the next, let's say, 3 years, not in the next decade or so, but in the midterm, that would make a significant difference.
Sure. So I'll say two things. One, just to return to what I was talking about, I do think the field has to move from trying to change the attitudes of individuals. So there's an important focus on changing social norms and changing gender norms. That's really important. But I think we must think about the institutions and the kind of forces that shape men and women and people of all gender identities, attitudes and experiences. So we have to think about education, we have to think about trauma, we have to think about the alcohol industry, we have to think about the arms industry, and address those as well. I think we're a little bit too focused on addressing the problem after it's happened. And, the problem, as you say, Zeynep, is that far too many women have no services available, get no justice from the criminal legal system. And so we do have to find a balance. But what I think happens, and I've experienced this presenting in Parliament in South Africa, talking around the world, is that for many people, including those in positions of power, when they think about addressing GBV, what they think about is the police, they think about the courts, they think about the jails. We're not going to arrest and incarcerate our way out of this problem. We have to address the drivers of men's violence against women and men's violence against men. So that's the first point, a focus on prevention and on some of the big structural forces that contribute to violence, including inequalities. And the second thing I think that has to happen is we must link up the various different forms of violence. So in my new project at the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, we're working in many countries around the world to address the issue of militarism. Now, of course, if we think about military violence and militarized masculinities, it's men who perpetrate armed conflict, who are involved in militias, and who are driving war, both as kind of decision makers and as participants. And of course, if we think about gender-based violence, it's men who commit the vast majority of violence. So we have to link up these different forms of violence and figure out how we address them together. It can't be a range of different separate sectors, as you talked about earlier, each working in silos. So let me stop there.
Thank you, Dean. It also seems to come up throughout the summit, also under intersectionality, and how do we address that different systems of oppression actually work together. So definitely hear you on that.
That's right.
So Lula, would you like to go next?
Yeah, well, I think when we talk about changing the world, I think that you have to think on the individual level, and you have to think about the structures. When Dean talks about, changing the rules, the norms, the system, I think there are structures, okay? And I agree completely with him when he says that, the incarcerating people is not the answer, okay? Because when they go back to the streets, they're going to be the same or even worse. That's the experience in Brazil, where we have overcrowded prisons, and it doesn't help. It worsens the problem. And well, I'm an educator, so I think that, instead of sending people to jail, we should be educating them. Okay, that's why my priority has always been the children, okay, and teenagers and students, okay, because their minds are being formed, okay, and then I think that you can convince students that a world where men and women and boys and girls respect each other, it's a better world for everybody, okay? So, because in a sense, when men give up some power because to empower women, so they have the feeling that they are losing something, but it's the opposite. They are gaining. Okay, they are helping to build a more equal, more generous world. So I think that, we have to think about how to change individual behavior and how to change structures. Okay, because well, I don't think that sending incarcerating people is the answer. But on the other hand, you cannot leave perpetrators free at large and do nothing about it. Okay, and so in a certain way, in the extreme cases, you have to put them in jail, right? But I think, well, there's no roadmap here. Okay, it's something that we have to. I think the dialogue between women, LGBT community, including the transgender people, who I think are the greatest, the worst victims of sexual and gender violence, and then I think about Black women. I think about poor LGBT in the poor communities in Brazil. So this is very intricate, and I have a cat that doesn't stop. Okay, I think that's it for
I can
now.
relate the cat thing. Yeah, I would love to echo with Dean and Ula, and I would love to add one thing, which is inclusivity. I think before addressing myself as a trans right activist, I introduced myself as a feminist, and I think in this field, we, especially in our country, Bangladesh, we got to include more diversity, like disabled people, ethnic community, transgender people, non-binary people, also gay rights. So this needs to be included as well. And this is feminism. Like when we are talking about feminism or gender equality, we are legit in our country ignoring the trans right. How when we are talking about gender-based violence, we are not talking about how transgender people are getting sexually harassed every day, even in our country, in our madrasas. We call it Islamic school. There's a lot of boys, child, they get sexually harassed by the Islamic priest. So yeah, so we got to include this as well. And I think this is needed in this field, inclusivity.
Mm-hmm. Thank
And
you.
Now we're just going to add just a little add on to what Tanha said. So in addition to the inclusivity is also now we have different channels, which I think is really a great way that we're seeing change, where people with access to mobile phones or can go online and make their voices heard, especially women, and access to more information. So before, you didn't even know what your rights were, you didn't even know how to report, where to go. There was a longer process. But now if you are wronged or there's an injustice, you can actually rally support. So you can crowdsource support without necessarily having to go through the regular channels, which may discriminate against you. So I think now also that increase in different channels for women to put out their voices and their fears, and also that increase in channels for women to get more information to make better informed choices is another change that we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Regina. Actually, follows nicely to my to a question I wanted to ask you. After movements like Me Too, kind of, there seems to be these waves of outrage and kind of energy accumulating and exploding, and people do use these informal channels that you mentioned to kind of shame and reveal the patriarchy and how it's working and so on. And then where does the systemic change go? So we talked about kind of individual action, individual change, that it should be coupled, kind of, what needs to happen there in your opinion?
Yes. So I think there needs to be outlets to all these different movements coming on where there is traceable, actionable steps and consequences. So one of the things that we see here is that you see a movement start and then start to lose momentum because they're not getting the support that they need, or they get threats from different places, and then the momentum dies down. So what we need to see is still have champions who champion the cause, and we see actionable steps that happen afterwards. Or else it is just like, okay, you use these channels to complain, and then after a while, we go back to the system core or what we know. So I think that it's great that we have crusaders who fight the fight and keep championing and keep reminding the powers that be that, this needs to happen. This is an actionable step, and people are held accountable. So I think that's the other thing. Like, we need to see that more people are held accountable and that the movement continues. So it can't be a start and stop. It can't be something that got a lot of traction and then it's taken over by the next big thing. The movement needs to keep going so that we keep moving the needle, or else what happens is that there's a lot of noise, not a lot of actionable steps, and then we go back to the way things are. So when you come back and revisit the issue, you realize that in the moment it was very popular, but not a lot of actionable steps happened afterwards.
And Tanya, what do you think about this kind of Me Too and kind of there is so much violence against transgender individuals that
Yes.
is a Me Too in that possible, or what's your
Yeah,
take?
in our country, the Me Too movement was actually not that what would I say, popular or anything. But recently there is this movement, Rage Against Rape. Um, like we suddenly noticed that the sexual harassment or the rape case was rising. Like we are wondering why. Like we are so, and then we realized that the researchers and the people realized that like 5 to 10 years ago in our country, women did not have this courage to uh, raise their voice. And after the Me Too movement, now they are started to talk, started to raise their voice. And now what? After they're raising their voice, if we cannot see any actionable change, we just cannot stop, right? So after the Me Too movement in our country, we are telling that no, the movement hasn't finished yet. It's going on, and it won't stop before the gender-based violence is stopped, before the violence against the transgender people, the non-binary people is stopped. And we are, that Regina was mentioned, that holding accountable. We are holding accountable to family, to institutions, to society, the government, of course, because we see that in the family, women or people are getting harassed by their family members, and then we are not talking about it. So we are holding accountable to the family as well, and the government in our country. This is, you will be surprised to know that the laws, there are like hundreds years before when our country was colonialized, and in our country, under the definition of rape, marital rape is not included. Rape against trans people or men are not included. And now we are seeing that a lot of transgender people are facing sexual harassment every single day, and they can even not get help from police, because in our country the law are not reformed. So we are talking about it, we are holding government accountable, and we're telling that no, you gotta change the laws. The laws need to get reformed. And if we talk about the institution, CSE, what we call it, comprehensive sex education, it needs to be talked more. In our country, we are not taught about CSE. So we are talking about this, and we are still telling that no, the systematic change will happen only when the action is taken. It's not about only raising the voice. Yes, raising your voice is important, but actions need to get taken as well.
Thank you. So we promised some disagreement, but there doesn't seem to be much in this group, to be honest. There seems to be almost a collective consciousness speaking. Maybe my next question, and I'll first direct it to Regina because she directly works in that field, but then I will ask other speakers to comment as well. And it's about the kind of rise of women's leadership and kind of this rise in numbers of women getting in power positions, this being celebrated, endorsed almost globally, and kind of also being prescribed as a corrective force for all the bad leadership that is in the world, which is mostly men occupying power positions. So, Regina, in your opinion, kind of what are the ups of this? Are there any downs? How do you see this wave?
So if you look at my country, for example, we're going to the polls on December 7th. And for the first time in our history, there are 3 women that are on the ballot box to be elected as presidents. And if you look across the celebration of women in different corporate organizations, so we're seeing a lot more women hired to different top positions. So we are seeing sort of this new notion of there is no glass ceiling, like women are shattering the glass ceiling and all of that. So that is the app, like transforming the narrative. what is the challenge is that these women are held to an unbelievable standard of what they are supposed to be able to accomplish and do. And they are held to so much scrutiny. And once again, they are criticized a lot for their person. So one of the ladies that is standing for president is a single mother. And that became a whole conversation as to how a single mother could be competent enough to run the country. And so they receive even more sort of backlash, which attacks them as individuals. And I think the other thing is too much high expectation for what they can actually accomplish in a short period of time. So where we see some women rise to leadership positions, people are expecting that they're going to work wonders or miracles within a short period of time, not understanding that even within those power structures, they have to navigate so many different things. They're under so much pressure, and there are so many sacrifices that they have to do, and that it takes time. And some women are even elected or put in these positions as token women to sort of show that the country or the company is progressive. So they can't even do much. So I think in terms of the up, there's the change in the narrative. In terms of the down, it is like, we really have to make sure that these are not token positions to please the masses, that, oh, we put some women there and they don't really have the power, and that we don't hold these women to these ridiculous standards of them going to make change within the shortest possible time, when we understand that there's a system that they came into and they will try and move things, but it takes time.
So it's not like the happy ending just when you get to that position, and
Exactly.
actually it can be
like, even in our country, our prime minister is a woman, and the opposite leader, team leader, is women as well. And I'm seeing women leading the parliament, being the speaker since I was child, but I still am seeing the gender-based violence is happening, even though my PM is a woman. So I think it's not necessarily to be which gender is leading, but how the leaders are, how the leadership is. I mean, if there's this misogynist women is leading, their own justice won't happen. So I think it's important that women coming to the parliament, or women leading things, women going to workplace, but it's also important women knows the right, women knows what feminism is, not only women, but all gender, transgender people as well. So yeah, and also I have seen in my personal experience a lot of women, unfortunately, so I noticed that there's this internal transphobia, and I saw how in our country for decades feminism or femme activists are actually silently ignoring the trans rights. So, and that actually made me a bit angry. Why? I mean, that's not what feminism is. So and if I talk about patriarchy, and if I talk about the women and trans rights, we have this mutual thing that both of our fight is against patriarchy. So I think it's high time we talk about how can we defeat the patriarchy and uproot the misogyny, no matter what type of gender is in the leaderboard.
Thank you, Tana. I want to turn to Lula and I know you were impressed and not so impressed with the Pope's latest enforcement of same-sex marriages. What was that? There seems to be actually disagreement within oneself more so than with each other. So what was the disagreement there?
Well, I think from a very personal perspective, okay, if I think about the situation in Brazil, we have a legal same-sex marriage, okay? So in a certain way, the words of the Pope are they are useless, okay, because we can get married, okay. I got married legally, okay, a few years ago. Then I got divorced because you have to experience the whole thing, right? Get married and get divorced. And but I think that for many countries, for most countries, his words were very, very powerful. Okay, because that has a lot of consequences on lawmakers, for instance. Okay, that they will. Well, historically, we know that religions have been patriarchal, have been you know they have oppressed women. Okay, but I think this is changing. Okay, we have been seeing lots of religions, denominations that have empowered women. Then you have women who are priests and bishops. Okay, but this is not the case of the Catholic Church. Okay, so in a certain way, it's good to hear the Pope, but on the other hand, you think, well, what about our women in the Catholic Church? Why are they not ordained as deacons, at least as deacons, right? So, but I think this is in the heat of the moment, and I think that the tendency is to things to advance. Last Sunday, we had the local elections in Brazil for the city councils, and we got lots of transgender people elected for the very first time in Sao Paulo, which is the largest city of Brazil. We had one of the candidates with the most votes is a black transgender woman. Okay, I think this is not. This is very important. This is not something there. Oh, okay. It's symbolic, and it means that the communities are getting organized, and they want to be heard, and they want changes.
Thank
And
you.
well,
So
okay.
what I'm hearing is actually actions speak louder than words. So you are looking at actually what is being done within the church, kind of, rather than endorsing things that are already won legal battles in some places. So basically, I have a few more questions, but we also have questions from the participants. If we had time, I was going to ask Dean actually, because very often when we talk about engaging boys and men, immediately eyebrows are raised, and how are we going to do that? How do we make sure women's voice is not compromised? How do we share resources? How do we know what their real intention is? This kind of reactions. So I was going to ask kind of, what can be like a litmus test of this? But I will hold that because I know you have a whole guide explaining this. So we will share that with the summit participants so they can read up. I will turn to Ezgi so she can share one or two questions from the chat.
Thank you, Zeynep. There is actually a quite interesting chat on Swapcard. So I would like to ask Verista's question, which was a reflection to Lula's point about there are so many things to be done. She's asking, how do you all maintain your well-being while working in the gender issues, which are still quite difficult conversations to have for some people?
All right, so people got concerned about your well-being probably, and also want to learn. So if we can do a very quick round, kind of, what is the thing that keeps your energy up, that you do to take care of yourself?
Okay, so I'm gonna start because I have to leave to join another panel. And just quickly say, I think for me, it's just surrounding myself with the positive stories or the change that I see happening, and then making sure that I have support from family, friends, and taking time to just whoosah and taking the moment. So I really surround myself with my family, friends, people that are supportive, and I take some me time to focus on the positive as we keep moving along.
Thank you, Regina. We'll say goodbye to you to make sure you can catch your breath, and we'll lead people to connect with you. So we'll share ways of connecting with you.
Thank you all. Such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Just very quickly, I stay kind of sane through exercise and through working in a community of colleagues and comrades and friends. That's where I find inspiration and support. So I think, to take this work forward over the long haul, we have to do it together in community.
If I say that in our country, there's this extremist people, like religious extremists, they often threaten us for the topic we work on. But yeah, my team, I have this really amazing 50 people's team. So they actually help me be this energetic, or whenever I feel down, they're always having my back. So I'm always grateful for my team.
Well, I think everything has been said already. And I just would like to add that how important it was to me to be selected as a fellow in the Ashoka network. Okay. That was, I have no words to express how grateful I am, and how important it was to get to know other social entrepreneurs. And it's a great pleasure and honor to get to know Jikin, Tanya, and Regina, who has already gone. And thanks for the opportunity. Okay, it's been a great session, and I hope we can keep talking in the future. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Actually, our calls to action are directly tied to your well-being tips. So as we close, we are interviewing Ashoka Fellows working on gender equity and justice, and publishing them weekly at Forbes.com. So if you're looking for inspiring stories, how-tos, what are the insights emerging, we strongly urge you to follow us there. The first 2 interviews are out. There's going to be quite a few more coming, including with the speakers here. So that's one call to action, which is apparently also good for well-being. The other one is, as part of the summit, we have a virtual chat for people to meet who are interested in gender issues. So we have a chat called Gender Justice. So if you want to connect with people from this session or other gender-related sessions, feel free to join us there. And we can always connect with myself, Ezgi, and the speakers who are registered over Swapcard. So let's send invites to each other, let's stay in touch. And also please nominate Ashoka Fellows. So if you know people who are doing impactful, innovative work in this space, let us know. So thank you to Tanha, Dean, Lula, Regina, Ezgi for holding the space and making everything so smooth. And let's consider this the start of a conversation. So just a taster of the richness of the issues that are on the table. Thank you to our dear participants for choosing this session over others. And let's stay in touch.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Zeynep.